practices in the creative industry sector in the Philippines. Jointly organized by the Division for Sustainable Development Goals, Department of Economic Affairs, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the United Nations, or DESA DSDG, and the Department of Trade and Industry, the Philippines. The event is a part of the National MSME Week of the Philippines, hosted by the DTI. It is also a part of the project enhancing national capacities for unleashing full potentials of micro, small, and medium enterprises in achieving sustainable development goals in developing countries through DESA DSDG, which is funded by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Sub-Fund as part of the United Nations Peace and Development Fund. The event aims to explore impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on MSMEs in the creative industry sector in the Philippines. Moreover, it would also examine policy responses and international good practices to support MSME resilience through external impacts, including the COVID-19, in the post-COVID-19 economic resurgence. We are honored to have on board today speakers from UNDESA, DTI, Design Singapore Council, FabLab Barcelona, Spain, and a social entrepreneur from Holicao, Cebu. My name is Elena Arbon, Assistant Regional Director, DTI. I would be the moderator of this event. Before we start, I would like to remind every participant to please mute yourselves and turn off the videos and eliminate the background noise as much as possible. If you have any questions, please raise the questions in the chat box. We will collect and address your questions in the Q&A session. I would also appreciate the cooperation of speakers to keep your speech and presentation in the time allotted. Thank you very much. Now I would like to introduce to you our first speaker, Mr. Samson Sibanda, Chief National Strategies and Capacity Building Branch, DESA DG, who will deliver the opening remarks of this event. Mr. Sibanda has over 15 years of progressively responsible experience in a broad range of sustainable development issues at the global, regional, and national levels, including the various intergovernmental processes that underpin this work. Mr. Sibanda provides policy advice to the Director of the Division, to the Undersecretary General, and senior officials of the Department on capacity development related to the follow-up to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Rio +20 and World Summit on Sustainable Development, the Samoa Pathway, and related UN activities. He leads and manages the activities undertaken by the branch that supports DESA's operational work aimed at developing capacities of developing countries to translate internationally agreed policy frameworks and programs at country level. In particular, he leads a team that provides advisory services and tailored support to developing countries, focusing on integrating the 2030 Agenda into national development plans and strategies, preparation of voluntary national reviews, and the identification of gaps and challenges with national implementation. This work contributes to accelerating the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including the Sustainable Development Goals and their targets, and commitments to increased engagement of member states and other stakeholders. He oversees the work of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, 2 project offices, the United Nations Office for Sustainable Development, or UNOSD, in the Republic of Korea, and the United Nations Center for Regional Development, or UNCRD, in Japan. These project offices carry out several capacity development activities to support developing countries in planning and implementing sustainable development strategies and promoting sustainable regional development and awareness of environmental issues. Mr. Sibanda holds a doctorate and an MA in demography from the University of Pennsylvania, a master's in science in population studies, and BA in geography with honors from the University of Zimbabwe. Let's now welcome Mr. Sibanda.
Thank you, Ms. Maria Elena Apon, for the opening remarks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to join you today at this capacity building event on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the micro, small, and medium enterprises in the creative industry sector in the Philippines. This event is timely and focuses on an important topic as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impose huge societal and economic impacts around the world. The pandemic has not spared any nation, and it has impacted all of us. The measures that have been put in place to flatten the curve and contain the virus have not only impacted people working in creative industries, but have also changed how we consume the work produced by the creative industry, whether it's music, performing arts, or visual arts. The revenues generated by the creative sector have plummeted, and the employment levels have sharply fallen. Lockdowns and social distancing measures have also meant that cultural and creative sectors are not able to attract tourists or bring communities together and foster social inclusion and psychological well-being. In that regard, this crisis is a serious threat to the survival of many micro, small, and medium enterprises and workers in cultural and creative production. However, I would be remiss if I also failed to point out that there are emerging opportunities that this crisis has created, such as new content platforms and emerging technologies to deliver content to wider audiences. These new opportunities can enhance the resiliency and sustainability of MSMEs in this sector. I'm therefore delighted to note that the Division for Sustainable Development Goals of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs has jointly organized this event with the Department of Trade and Industry of the Government of the Republic of the Philippines. This event is being held as part of the National MSME Week of the Philippines, hosted by the Department of Trade and Industry. I would also like to express my sincere thanks to Undersecretary Ms. Blesila Latayona and to Assistant Secretary Ms. Asteria Cabet of the Department of Trade and Industry for joining us today. Your participation demonstrates the high-level commitment of DTI to the partnership with the Department of Economic and Social Affairs on supporting MSME growth for achieving SDGs in the Philippines with creative and innovative solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, micro, small, and medium enterprises comprise the majority of business entities globally. They contribute significantly to employment and economic growth around the world. They're a crucial force for creating jobs, reducing poverty and hunger, and stimulating entrepreneurship and innovation for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The roles of MSMEs as enduring enterprises for jobs and livelihoods, business incubation, and entrepreneurship can hardly be ignored, especially during these difficult times. Unfortunately, the economic slowdown triggered by COVID-19 has taken a heavy toll on MSMEs, including increased cash flow pressures, working capital erosion, interruption to supply chains, and the loss of customers. The pandemic has laid bare the existing challenges in the MSME sector, underscoring the need for coherent and holistic policy responses supporting MSME resilience and expanding their contribution to sustained and inclusive economic growth. Through the project Enhancing National Capacities for Unleashing the Potential of MSMEs in Achieving SDGs in Developing Countries, funded by the UN Peace and Development Fund, DESA, Division for Sustainable Development Goals, has worked closely with DTI of the Government of the Republic of the Philippines on optimizing policy framework for promoting MSME growth and achieving SDGs in the Philippines. We are honored to receive both the Undersecretary and the Assistant Secretary during the study tour to Singapore and Indonesia that we undertook in November 2019. It was a strategic occasion where dialogue among policymakers was coordinated on good practices in supporting MSMEs in the creative industry sector. I'm happy to see that the spirit of partnership that has been carried forward, which has led to this capacity building event. I'm also glad to note that through the partnership with the DTI, a report on impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on implementing Cebu City's creative agenda for achieving SDGs in the Philippines has been delivered by our consultant, Mr. Gil Butch Karugay. The report provides an overview on impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on MSMEs in the Philippines, in addition to examining policy responses to support MSMEs in the creative industry sector. It also shares interesting examples on how MSME entrepreneurs in the Cebu City have taken the initiative to improve business continuity and help foster a speedy recovery from the economic crisis posed by the pandemic. Mr. Karangay will present the report today. I hope his presentation would help contribute to stimulate further discussions on strengthening MSMEs and building back better in the Philippines, leveraging on the experience of the Cebu City. Ladies and gentlemen, at the time when the global economy is struggling to reopen and the uncertainty of a second wave of the COVID-19 outbreak still looms ahead, our discussions today are timely as they will help us to explore and understand gaps, demands, and challenges that MSMEs are facing to recover from the COVID-19 induced shocks. If past economic shocks are any guide, the effects of the pandemic are likely to linger for years. It would be critical to ensure sustained policy support, including the provision of targeted emergency relief funding for MSMEs in this sector, if we are to protect the creative industry, to protect the creative industries and ensure a job-rich recovery. Policy support targeting enhancing and upgrading the technological skills and digital access for MSMEs and their customers is also critical. Moreover, international cooperation and partnerships remain the key for building an enabling policy environment for MSME growth in the post-COVID-19 economic resurgence. The United Nations system is playing a critical role in strengthening the global ecosystem for improving MSME resilience, actions that will contribute to a transformative recovery for building back better through inclusive and sustainable pathways. Partnership among national governments, international organizations, and the private sector, which has been exhibited through the capacity building event today, would be important to fully leverage the power of MSMEs in building a sustainable future. I thank you very much for your attention.
The frame. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Sibanda, for your opening remarks. It excellently laid out the frame for this capacity building event. Now we move on to our next speaker. She is the Undersecretary for Regional Operations Group of the Department of Trade and Industry. Prior to her appointment as Undersecretary of DTI, Yusek Bless Lantayona was the Assistant Secretary of DTI Regional Operations Group in charge of Kapatid Mentor Me, Shared Service Facilities, Industry Cluster Enhancement Project, Great Women Project 2, among others. She holds an MBA degree in International Business from École Européenne d'Affaires, European School of Management in Paris, France. Her career in the civil service started in NEDA Region 11, then moved to DTI in various technical positions at first, then as Provincial Director of DTI Davao del Sur, as Assistant Regional Director of DTI Region 11, and was later appointed as Regional Director of DTI Region 3, or the Central Luzon area in the Philippines. In September 2019, she was appointed as the Supervising Undersecretary of the DTI Regional Operations Group in charge of the 16 regional offices, 81 provincial offices, and the Bureau of Small Micro Enterprise Development. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Undersecretary Lucilia A. Lantayona.
Good morning, everyone. I trust that you are all staying safe and healthy during these unusual times that we are in. The country's MSME sector is one of the most affected by COVID-19. While most of the MSMEs are now resuming operations with the easing of the community quarantine, it is still vital to help this sector cope with the disruption. The Philippine government is actively working to support the MSME sector bounce back better from the impacts of the pandemic through the various government programs and issuances which I will be presenting today. To start, allow me to give you an overview of the MSMEs to recognize how the sector plays a key role in the realization of the government's goal of ensuring inclusive growth and addressing income inequality. The MSMEs account for 99.52% of all establishments in the Philippines. 89.45% of these are micro, 10.5% are small, and 0.5% are in the medium category. Considered as the backbone of the economy, MSMEs are important in propelling the country's economic growth, being major contributors to GDP by stimulating domestic demand through job creation, innovation, and competition. In terms of geographical spread, the Philippine MSMEs are more concentrated in the National Capital Region, in Calabar Zone, and in Central Luzon. The distribution of MSMEs in the country is strongly correlated with the GDP contribution of the regions. Based on the sectoral distribution, nearly half of the country's MSMEs are engaged in wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles, and motorcycles. As regards the contribution to employment, micro enterprises account for 29%, small enterprises account for 27%, and medium enterprises account for 7% of total employment. Together, the MSME sector accounts for 63% of the country's total employment. Appreciating this data, support to MSMEs does not only positively affect the entrepreneurs and their businesses, but the millions of MSME workers as well. MSMEs serve as catalysts in reducing poverty by creating jobs. While community quarantine is one of the necessary measures to prevent the further spread of the virus, it is, however, taking a toll on the MSMEs. DTI has been monitoring the impact of COVID-19, and as of May 14, 2020, the results of our nationwide monitoring revealed that 56% of the MSMEs have stopped operations, 14% have limited operations, and 30% are in full operations. Mimaropa region ranks in terms of the number of MSMEs that have stopped or closed their shops, followed by Region 10 or the Northern Mindanao region and the National Capital Region. There is no doubt that COVID-19 pandemic is hurting the enterprises. Hence, DTI, through the following programs, support the MSME bounce back stronger and contribute to the national aspiration to heal as one. One of the programs that we have is COVID-19 Assistance to Restart Enterprises Program, or what we call CARES Program of the Small Business Corporation, which is an attached agency to the Department of Trade and Industry. CARES is a 1 billion enterprise rehabilitation financing facility under the Pondo sa Pagbabago at Pag-asenso or P3, to support micro and small enterprises affected by COVID. Micro enterprises may borrow 10,000 up to 200,000, while small enterprises may borrow a higher loan amount but will not exceed 500,000 pesos. This loan facility is interest-free. The other program that we have is the Livelihood Seeding Program, Negosyo Serbisyo sa Barangay. The allotted funding for the LSP-NSB of 203 million will be used to provide a package of livelihood kits and business advisory assistance and services amounting to at least 5,000 to 8,000, and this goes to MSMEs affected by the natural and human-induced calamities, including health disasters. We also have the Shared Services Facility Project, Fabrication Laboratories. Fab Labs are producing personal protective equipment or PPEs, ethyl alcohol, face shields, aerosol boxes that can be made manually or using the digital fabrication machines such as 3D printers, laser cutters, etc. SSFs, on the other hand, are producing face masks and face shields. Fabrication of items such as scrub suits, reusable masks, and ventilators are being made to address the gap. Then we have the Descuento Caravan. These are rolling stores, some of which are done jointly with the Department of Agriculture and the local government units in cooperation with the MSME suppliers to ensure supply of basic necessities priced in accordance with or lower than the suggested retail prices. This also provide markets for our MSME manufacturers of basic necessities to sell their products, as well as assisting our consumers by providing them products at discounted prices. Descuento Caravan Rolling Store is one of the programs of DTI under its Recovery and Rehabilitation Plan. We also have the programs of the Philippine Trade Training Center or the Global SME Academy, ASEAN SME Academy. The PTTC paves the way to a more convenient, wider, and open access online trainings and resources for the Philippine MSMEs. The ASEAN MSME Academy is a one-stop multi-platform online learning and information resource for Southeast Asian MSMEs. Around 60 courses on financing and accounting, management, marketing, operations, technology, and trade logistics are being offered for free in the Academy. It contains courses on digital shifts such as digitalization and its impact to MSMEs, boost your business with Facebook, social marketing, social media marketing, effective business websites, among others. Then we have tech tools for MSMEs. Reinvent your business during the COVID-19 crisis. This Google site was developed to provide information to MSMEs on different technology tools, applications, platform, and resources available in coping with the challenges of the community quarantine. Most of the tools or solutions are free, while others have corresponding fees. These are categorized based on the functionality across multiple categories, such as e-commerce, e-payment, digital marketing, logistics, work-from-home collaboration tools, productivity tools, webinars, and finding an expert and government resources. Then we have the Control Plus B's Reboot Now, which offers a series of free webinars that are targeted to MSMEs who need to transform their business digitally. Enablers across the entire e-commerce ecosystem will provide their expertise and experiences on how to take advantage of the digital space. Aside from these programs, the following are the DTI issuances to assist MSMEs during the pandemic. We issued Memorandum Circular 20-22, which are the guidelines on business activities allowed to operate in the areas declared under enhanced community quarantine and general community quarantine. We also issued MC 20-21, which contains the guidelines on the operations of malls and shopping centers in areas declared under GCQ. We have MC 20-06, supplemented by several NCs on ensuring unhampered movement of cargo, transit of personnel of enterprises allowed to operate during the enhanced community quarantine. There is also an issuance which is called the MC 20-15, or the extension of operating hours for retail establishments authorized to operate during the enhanced community quarantine. And we had several issuances and even joint administrative order on the adoption of processes for the expedited release of refrigerated containers and dry vans. Lastly, let me share with you the DTI initiatives on the production of personal protective equipments or PPEs, which ran short in supply, especially at the onset of the pandemic. DTI ensured that concerned enterprises operate at 80 to 90% production capacity and that 45-day inventory for manufacturers of raw materials is maintained. We also ensured that the daily production level of 10,000 PPEs by member companies of CONWEP. We also facilitated the production of a 10 million face mask supply from Medtex International Corporation, Ltd. We also ensured the procurement and full delivery of 2 million face masks by PITC to DOH. PITC, or the Philippine International Trading Center, is an attached agency to the Department of Trade and Industry. And we also ensured the production of 2.5 million masks, face masks, and 1,000 ventilators every month by Taiwan companies named New Kimpo Group, which is solely dedicated for the Philippine market. Now, these are the things that we have done, and that is all that I can share with you today. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker will talk on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on MSMEs in the creative industry sector in the Philippines, the experience of Cebu City. Mr. Gil Zaire Butch Karungay is a creative entrepreneur, design advocate, and community crusader. He is passionate about the possibilities and intrinsic talent in his hometown of Cebu. He is also the Chief Executive Officer of Zai Design Hive, the latest incarnation of the country's pioneering fashion jewelry exporter, which has since expanded to other disciplines, and Chief Reinvention Officer of District 32 at Mactan, Cebu, the leading operator of commercial concessions at the Mactan Cebu International Airport. He was the private sector lead in attaining Cebu's UNESCO Creative City of Design designation and is the current chair of the Matic Hub, affiliate events chair of Cebu Design Week 2020 and the Blue Mango Awards 2020. He is a past chair of the Business Council of the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, was creative director of the first Cebu Design Week, and was an ex-president of Fame Foundation Philippines. A graduate of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania with a degree in marketing and finance, Butch worked in strategic planning at McCann Erickson and corporate strategy at American Express, both in New York, before returning to the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Butch Karungay.
Thank you very much, ARD Nanette, for the kind introduction. At this time, I would like to extend my appreciation to our colleagues in UNDESA and DTI for organizing this webinar, as well as to my fellow speakers for accepting our invitation despite the delayed minute nature of the request. Thanks are also in order to our participants for taking the time to join us from different parts of the world today. When I first signed the terms of reference with UNDESA earlier this year, COVID-19 was merely a blip on the radar. However, as my consultancy started 11 days before the initial lockdown in Manila, it became obvious that my job description would have to be changed rather drastically. I've had to learn and relearn a lot along the way, and there are still much that can be further improved and refined. In the next 12 minutes or so, I will be touching on the following topics. Given the limited time, I've attempted to be as comprehensive as possible, but I've had to substantially cut down the slides. However, I will be posting my contacts at the end of the deck for those who want any clarifications or need more info. Let me begin by briefly talking about Cebu, especially for the benefit of those who are not familiar with our island. Fringed by white sand beaches and surrounded by sparkling turquoise seas, in the center of the 7,000 plus islands of the Philippine archipelago is the historic and dynamic city of Cebu. For over 500 years, it has been a hub of trade, a center of culture, and a model of resiliency. Home to a population of over 1 million souls, Cebu, when aggregated with its neighboring cities, comprises the second largest metropolitan area in the Philippines. It is also a major center for tourism and boasts the country's largest seaport and second busiest airport. A former ASEAN city of culture, Cebu is a favorite of international travelers, making multiple appearances over the years and in many polls. In October 2019, it joined the elite list of global cities as a UNESCO Creative City of Design. Despite its lack of natural resources, due to its topography, Cebu, much like Hong Kong and Singapore, was a strategic trading hub even before the Spaniards arrived, thanks to its enviable location and deep water harbor. Modern mass manufacturing started after World War II, with the birth of the country's furniture export industry, which was soon followed by gifts, toys, housewares, and fashion jewelry. In the late 70s, the country's first export processing zone was opened in Mactan to coincide with the relocation of the airport to the island, which brought in electronics, semiconductors, and other high-precision assemblies. More recently, the island's economy started its shift to services with the opening of the first call centers in the late 90s. Today, even though business process outsourcing firms make up only 4% of establishments, they employ almost a quarter of Cebu's workforce. MSMEs form the backbone of the country's economy, representing a majority of the number of registered firms. Next slide, please. When it comes to employment, however, they account for 60% nationwide. In Cebu, they account for about half, meaning companies here tend to be larger in size and scale vis-a-vis the national average. Considered by many to be the country's design capital, next slide. Considered by many to be the country's design capital, Cebu is home to a very diverse set of creative practitioners in practically all the disciplines that the United Nations Commission on Trade and Development have identified. While the exact figures are almost impossible to determine, we scoured a wide range of resources to arrive at an estimated 1,300 firms, 50,000 employees, and about $550 million in annual revenue, representing 7% of Cebu's GDP. Now that you have a better idea of what Cebu is, let's shift our focus to the pandemic at hand and zoom out a little bit for a quick situationer on how it's impacting the country at large. At first glance, the numbers don't seem too dire. Although we're in the third percentile of number of cases and aren't doing too well in the number of tests administered, we're ranked 103rd in deaths per million with a fairly low case fatality ratio. Cebu, however, was especially hard hit by COVID-19. Next slide, please. Sorry. Can you go back? I think that's the wrong deck. However, beyond the health implications of this pandemic, we all know that the economic and social fallout can be even greater, and it is in these aspects that the Philippines is doing rather poorly. Before COVID-19, the country was experiencing stellar growth from a combination of foreign direct investment, infrastructure spending, and massive foreign currency inflows from overseas Filipino workers and business process outsourcing firms. In the beginning of 2020, growth for the year was expected to be around 7%, even surpassing that of China and approaching India's. However, more than 2 decades of continuous growth has been abruptly put to a halt, and it is with 100% certainty that the Philippines, like most of the world, will go into a recession in 2020. There are varying estimates on how deep that recession will be, ranging from 1.3% from the World Bank all the way to 6% at the low end of the spectrum. In its last survey, can we go to the next slide, please? Backslide. In its last survey, the country's Department of Labor and Employment registered historical lows, with unemployment jumping 250% to almost 18%. Of the half of Filipinos who managed to remain employed, the number of working hours per week decreased due to mandatory work restrictions. The incidence of poverty, which was already cut in half from the nearly 40% high in the early 90s, is predicted to jump again to hover around 20% and will delay the Philippines' transition into the upper middle class of countries by a few years. Next slide. Understandably, consumer sentiment is also at unprecedented lows. Latest surveys from the independent social weather station have indicated that these are the worst results in the 30-plus year history of the bellwether, which assesses both current status as well as expectations for the next few months. This is consistent with the Global Web Monitor's Corona research, wherein of all nationalities, Filipinos indicated they were the most financially impacted, both personally and collectively as a country. Going back to Cebu and the COVID impact, Cebu was especially hard hit. Constituting only 1% of the country's population, yesterday's figures show that the city had registered over 8,000 cases, which represents 11% of COVID-19 infections in the country. Because of mass testing, Cebu already surpassed every other city in the country in terms of case count in May, and has endured the longest and hardest lockdowns in the Philippines, if not the world. A brief respite for 2 weeks in the first half of June was rescinded due to the R0 surpassing 2 and critical care facility utilization at alarming levels. Currently, it still remains as the only city at MECQ, which is the second highest alert level, but with improving metrics, we are hopeful that another downgrade will be effected by August 1. Over the last few months, a substantial amount of research has been conducted, including numerous focus groups, surveys, case studies, and copious amounts of informal message threads. It became apparent very quickly that the entire creative value chain, from supply to production to distribution and access, were severely impacted. To make things worse, the pandemic has brought to fore idiosyncratic weaknesses that were already existing pre-COVID. So issues like underemployment, multiple job holding, high mobility, seasonality, the democratization of design, and the fact that a lot of creative types are freelancers and are part of the informal economy, which prevents them from accessing most social services. Like in other industries, COVID-19 has accelerated paradigm shifts, bolstering megatrends that were already threatening the creative status quo. A lot of these sentiments in the previous slide was confirmed in the main survey we conducted from May to June. 92% of the respondents had to either shut down completely or work from home. Almost 80% received no government assistance. 65% experienced cancellations, a number that will probably go up even more as the lockdowns persist. Almost 2/3 of respondents have no business continuity plans, although some stated that they were in the process of making them. Nearly 3/4 stated that they will continue to work remotely in some form until a vaccine or effective treatment protocols are discovered. On a brighter note, 9% of creatives did report an increase in activity, and these were the companies that were already positioned in the online space who were able to pivot quickly during the pandemic. Despite the hardships that befell Cebu-based creatives, it did not stop them from doing their part in disaster relief. As in previous external shocks, the private sector really stepped up and organized various homegrown grassroots movements, whether individually or as a group. Local artists, along with the Arts Council of Cebu and Cube Gallery, for example, came to the fore very early on and raised a big amount of money for the production of PPEs together with Fab Lab Cebu at the University of the Philippines. The music practitioners, the musicians, also did comfort couches from home, launched a series of aid packages just for their members, and started an online meetups in July. Cebu Design Week came up with a trio of initiatives. First was to reaffirm the importance of staying at home while still being productive with their Stay at Home, Stay Creative campaign. The second is what Cebu can do as a business reboot initiative to showcase what businesses have done during the pandemic and how they are pivoting to the new realities. The last is a Cebu Design Week Home and Makers Mart, which links local buyers with traditionally exporting companies that would normally not be selling products in the Philippines. Hustle Cebu is a creative marketplace that was launched by new media entrepreneurs, mostly for the freelancer market. They also promote trade and skills bartering as well as capacity building for millennials to share with their peers. Matic Hub is an enabling space for materials, art, technology, innovation, and circular economies. Came up with a variety of further capacity building initiatives as well as daily positive messaging. While there are many smaller initiatives launched by different groups, a more thoughtful, cohesive, and substantial response specific to the creative sector, MSMEs, need to be formalized. While we would love to have the resources that our friends from Design Singapore have, and you will hear about the great programs that they've already introduced in a few minutes, we also acknowledge that the first tranches of government funding have already been exhausted, and most resources have been diverted to fighting this virus. So any intervention needs to be low cost, high impact, easy to access, and straightforward to implement. Like a lot of things, disaster response follows the rule of threes, with the first phase being immediate relief to mitigate damage and alleviate impacts. The second involves capacity building to reboot lives and businesses. And the last is longer-term interventions to ensure that the recovery is sustained. In reality, the Philippines is somewhere in between phases 1 and 2 because of the unpredictability and persistence of the virus. But because there's no sense in looking back, and because it's beyond our purview, we will not be discussing phase 1. However, it is important to reiterate that 80% of those we surveyed did not receive any form of government aid, either in the form of the social amelioration programs or via business wage subsidies. It is also worth noting that our phase 3 projects, such as the Cebu Design Museum and the revitalization of the city's historical core, have been shelved indefinitely for obvious reasons. Let me instead focus on rebuild initiatives that will be launched in the next few months. Next slide, please. With most creative MSMEs in survival mode, it is very easy to understand that many feel overwhelmed. However, it became quickly clear that this pandemic has impacted subsectors differently. Some were able to pivot quickly, while others had a much more challenging time. Using a crisis strategy matrix, taking into account factors such as reliance on large gatherings, travel, public funds, and international logistics, the necessity for close human interaction and consumption during the pandemic, we will be launching subsectoral business reboot toolkits at the end of next month. They will be tailored by creative discipline, as certain trends have emerged as to how each have been impacted based on the aforementioned metrics. This resource will be validated with various stakeholders, aligned with government stimulus initiatives, and will include ways on how to access support, particularly funding. We are hoping to be able to nudge DTI to simplify access and use this as an opportunity to incent those in the informal sectors to migrate and register so they are better tracked and aided. We're really hoping that these toolkits will come in handy especially for the majority of creative entrepreneurs who currently do not have any business continuity plans. Next slide. In September, the third edition of Cebu Design Week will evolve from a once-in-a-year event into a year-round platform, community, and movement that will be hopefully better aligned with the SDG 30s. The Blue Mango Awards, which is a key component of Cebu Design Week, will also pivot into a set of challenges wherein cross-disciplinary teams tackle contemporary COVID-19 related problems and propose real-world solutions, whether it be in materials, products, and or services. Later this year, we hope to fully activate the Creative Cebu Grid, which was a key component of our UNESCO bid. It has 4 quadrants composed of the national government, the local government unit, the academe, and the private sector. This grid was designed to continuously assess the state of Cebu's creative industries, identify and bridge gaps, align strategies and initiatives, so redundancies are reduced and synergies hopefully achieved. The Creative Cebu Portal, can you please go back to the last slide? The Creative Cebu Portal is the virtual manifestation of this grid and will act as a 24/7 converging point, resource library, sharing and enabling platform, and a repository for Cebuano design, past, present, and future. With the grid and portal in place, we hope to better leverage the UNESCO designation, whether it's in collaborating with the 39 other cities of design, other Philippine regions and cities, and of course, local creative MSMEs. To be sure, the roads ahead are fraught with many challenges, a lot of which may seem insurmountable. However, history has taught us repeatedly that despite all the continuous external shocks, whether natural or man-made, humanity has always triumphed and makes the greatest leaps during the darkest of times. We now find ourselves at a precipice, one that the media is quick to sensationalize as the greatest challenge we as a global community have faced in 100 years. What is, however, barely reported is that with all this adversity also comes great opportunity to reassess our past choices, to correct our mistakes, and to craft a much more inclusive, sustainable, and meaningful future for us and the undoubted generations to follow. Artists, designers, and other creative practitioners, while seemingly especially vulnerable, play a critical role in creating this tomorrow, as an unprecedented number of people have realized that the path we left behind and the paths it led to were severely flawed. We as creative problem solvers must reassert the importance and value of our unique skill sets, work closer with one another, align with government, reach out to creatives in other regions and abroad. It is only by doing this can we magnify our reach and impact, come up with what makes sense, and forge the way forward, hopefully to a much better paradigm that is respectful of nature, each other, and ourselves. So with that, I end my presentation for today, but the conversation continues. Can we go to the next slide, please? Please feel free to reach out if you want to chat, collaborate, and spark some new projects. I know it is a lot of material to cover and absorb in a short amount of time, but I hope I was able to share some learnings and insights. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Cheers from Cebu, everyone.
Thank you very much, Butch, for that very comprehensive presentation. Let's move on to the next speaker, Mr. Jack Seo, Deputy Executive Director of the Design Singapore Council, Singapore. Jack was trained as an architect and he graduated with a Master of Architecture from the School of Architecture, National University of Singapore. Subsequently, he practiced architecture for 7 years in Singapore, Hong Kong, and London. In 2004, Jack joined the founding team of the Design Singapore Council and helped chart the agency's vision and mission. Currently, as the Deputy Executive Director, he is responsible for the development of new initiatives to drive adoption of design for innovation and strategy development in enterprises and the public sector. To grow the design sector in Singapore, he works with a team of dedicated design advocates to garner buy-in from public and private sector stakeholders in nurturing a vibrant and sustainable design community that can support other enterprises in their design innovation journeys. He also manages the strategy and governance team to keep the council on track and moving stronger in one unified direction. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Jack Seo.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, and thank you, Butch, for the slide preview. We are very appreciative of this opportunity to be able to share and learn from all the participants in this webinar. Okay, but before I start, in terms of what Singapore has done in helping our businesses in the creative industry during this pandemic period, I would like to introduce about Singapore. Next slide, please. So, Design Singapore Council is our national agency for design, and we are part of the Economic Development Board under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. What is our vision? Our vision is actually for Singapore to be an innovation-driven economy and lovable city by design. And our mission, there are three key ones: develop a design sector, how Singapore use design for innovation and growth, and lastly, to make life better for everyone. Next slide, please. So within the council, we had three pillars of work. One is about helping to promote demand, to increase demand for the use of design as an effective approach for solving societal problems. So this will influence our businesses, influence our different organizations, including the social sector. And the second pillar is about talent. Really, how do we develop new talent to support this industry? We need industry-ready, transdisciplinary talent. And we need to also start young and introduce design sensibility to every Singaporean. The last one, it is really about how do we develop our Singapore brand to make emotional connections both locally as well as globally. And this will also include how we help our local designers to build the brand narrative. Next one. So as everybody knows, I think Singapore is quite heavily impacted by the COVID-19 situation. We had almost 2 months of restricted movement as well as business restriction. There are two objectives in terms of the assistance that the government has put out. One is really about helping to keep jobs, right? That's important. And second is really about helping designers as well as all Singaporeans to take this opportunity to learn new skill sets, to learn new things that will then support their recovery path. So there are a few of these, I'm going to cover just a few of these initiative and support schemes that is available on a broad-based basis across all industry, including the creative industry. So there are schemes that provide tax and rent relief because of the business shutdown. There's also assistance schemes in terms of facilitating bridging loans. And then in terms of how to retain jobs, the job support scheme was set up to cover almost 10 months of wage support, those that have been employed all the way to August this year. But what's more important here is besides those who are employed, there's also a support for self-employed people, which the creatives mainly fall into that part. So that is one part that the government has not neglected as well. And obviously beyond the broad one, there's also sector-specific ones that will be more heavily involved for sectors that are directly impacted by the lockdown, like tourism, aviation, transport, and even entertainment. And for every business and every individual who has got some loan obligation, there's a moratorium for 6 months for any mortgage or loan being in terms of repayment. Next slide, please. So I mentioned about building capabilities. So this is the part where we realized that as a result of the different restrictions in movement, everybody is going onto the digital platforms, and we need to start building capabilities in these areas and provide support for different businesses to go onto these digital platforms like e-commerce. We are also looking at how do we support training during this period. Training itself is just one portion. The other one is really trying to find jobs, matching jobs, which have set up a kind of a SG United job site with kind of training for intern and traineeship, as well as for recent and new graduates, because the new graduates will be the one that is most hardly hit at this point in time, coming out to a situation where the economy is actually on the downturn. Next slide, please. On the design front, we also realized that because of the movement restriction and business close down, we can no longer carry out activities kind of on-site. So most of our engagement has gone online. So there's a slew of digital programs for which we allow for the industry to do peer-to-peer learning, hosting various types of webinars, talks, and seminars by different designers, both locally as well as internationally. Next slide. In the area where we were a little bit more targeted for the design sector, there are three key programs here that I would like to highlight. As we all know, because many of the projects as contracts has kind of either slowed down or cancelled, there is a fair amount of downtime for the design industry itself, which is why we decided to launch the Good Design Research. This is essentially a program to help designers and design firms to look into some of the global issues that the world is facing and to find solutions through deeper research. So in areas of sustainability, in areas of climate change, in the areas of maybe even building more inclusive community, as well as responding to how would workplace change as a result of COVID-19 in terms of all this pandemic. And this particular program is meant to support practice-based research. Singapore already has quite a number of programs supporting the institutions as well as research institutions. But on a practice level where things are a little bit more tangible, a little bit more commercializable, this is a scheme to help them push along. We launched our first call in March in the midst of the pandemic, and we received overwhelming response from design firms in putting up proposals for this particular program. Then the second piece I would like to highlight here is actually about getting designers on track for the lifelong learning. There's actually an award for designers going on digital courses during this period to support them and to encourage them to build new skill sets or to strengthen and augment current skill sets that they have in order to face the new world and the new normal post-COVID. The last program that we introduced as well, which will benefit not just design companies and creatives, but also all the other small and medium enterprises, is in terms of when you relook at your own service delivery, did you understand your customers? And this is the one that we have used to support any business that's interested to understand the current user journey mapping and understanding what could happen next in terms of changing the service delivery. And this is a broad-based program supported not just by Design Singapore, but also by our Enterprise Singapore in our Ministry of Trade and Industry. And with that, this is the end of my presentation, and I mentioned earlier, I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to be able to share this here. Looking forward to a more robust discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yo, for that very nice presentation about what Singapore is doing to combat COVID and for the creative sector. Our next speaker is Mr. Tomas Diaz. Tomas is a Venezuelan urbanist specialized in digital fabrication and its implication in the future of cities and society. He is co-founder of Fabla Barcelona at the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, the director of the Fab City Research Laboratory, and director of the Master in Design for Emergent Futures. He leads the Fab City Global Initiative in collaboration with an international team of thinkers and makers and the European project manager for the FAB Foundation. Tomas holds a bachelor degree in urban planning and sociology by the University of Simon Bolivar, Caracas, Venezuela, a diploma in social work at the University of La Habana, Cuba, a master in advanced architecture by IAAC, and a diploma in digital fabrication from a pilot program to kickstart a Fab Academy by completing the class How to Make Almost Anything, offered by MIT Center for Bits and Atoms in 2008. He works as a close collaborator in the development of the Fab Lab network together with MIT and the Fab Foundation. Tomas co-founded the Exploring Emergent Futures platform in the Design Products Department at the Royal College of Arts in London, and is co-founder of initiatives such as the crowd-sensing platform Smart Citizen, the social network FabLabs.io, and the artist residency Studio P52. His research interests relate to the use of digital fabrication tools to transform reality and how the use of new technologies can change the way people consume, produce, and relate with each other in cities. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tomas Diaz, co-founder, FabLab Barcelona, Spain.
Thank you very much, Maria Elena. Thank you, Butch, for the invitation and all the team organizing this super interesting connection, especially after such uncertain times. It was just in March where I was with you in Philippines,
Yes.
participating in the Making Futures program. And actually, thanks to that, I've been luckily locked down in Bali, in Indonesia, because it was my stopover before going to Barcelona, and that has unleashed many things that really I think that is serving now a fertile ground for future developments in Asian countries, and I hope to share with you that in the future. So I'm going to quickly tell you more or less about my work. As been said by Maria Elena, I am Venezuelan. This is my roles. Somehow I have, as you can see, many hats. Next slide, please. I've been in Barcelona for the last 14 years, more or less, where I went to finish my studies in urban design. And I found Fab Labs and digital fabrication by accident at the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia. And I had to set up Fab Lab Barcelona as part of my internship program there. What it ended up is me taking over the Fab Lab and setting up the agenda of that Fab Lab that I'm going to share you in a bit. But I wanted to share with you my personal interest and why to use technology, why democratize the use of technology, why challenge the role of design in society, and why to think about design in ways that it's not that we are proposing solutions, but actually we are enabling futures or enabling emergent futures. Next slide, please. So I'm interested, especially, I come from Venezuela. Probably you have heard in the news. It's one of the most challenging countries at the moment. I'm not going to get into politics, but you can see all over the world we're seeing like the emergence of polarization in the political views, and I think that's important to work to think about that, because design is politics in somehow. In a way, right? And technology is not neutral, even though that some people wants to say it. I'm also interested on the, I have an interesting background because I have both roots. My dad is Spanish, and my mom is from Venezuela. I was born and raised in Venezuela. I moved to Barcelona. I'm now in Bali. So I'm really interested about the colonial history of our times because in a way, I feel like I am the colonized and the colonizer in a way, right? And I believe that one of the really, deep harms that our society has now is basically the implementation of foreign policies that are probably 200-year-olds and in some cases 500-year-olds. And I'm sure that the Philippines know very well about it, as well as Venezuela. So I'm also interested on access to knowledge, especially to combat information obesity. Where really we never had access to so much information and knowledge, but the problem is that has been used to manipulate people, sometimes manipulate votings, and sometimes manipulate behaviors, right? And then finally, I'm interested also in the how we have been accepted the toxic food chains, believe it or not, foods our fuel, and then we are every day we are inserting in our systems toxicity, and we're putting that toxicity back in the environment as well. Next slide, please. So these topics that I'm talking about, we call them weak signals in our research agenda, right? Can you put the next slide, please? These weak signals are actual trends or potential trends that are emerging, and that somehow start to tell us, or start to open opportunities for design and technology to treat them before they become a big thing. For instance, and this is a very clear example, in November 2019, COVID-19 was a weak signal. But then by March in 2020, it became a reality. It went from a weak signal in November, maybe January, February, it was a trend. And then in March, it has become something that's part of our everyday life. And then probably, hopefully, by the end of this year, beginning of next year, it will become part of the past. And the way that we responded to this was, was very unexpected. And we are still figuring out how this virus is evolving, how we can solve the immediate emergencies that we have in relation to it, and also how we're going to treat with the new normal, as you have seen many political agendas at the different levels, at country level, city level, and so on. Next slide, please. So these weak signals somehow, as I said, became kind of shaped by the COVID-19 crisis. So we were doing research with our students in the Master in Design for Emerging Futures, and suddenly we were in the middle of the pandemic crisis, and we needed to redesign the whole learning experience program. I was mentioned, as I was mentioned before by our previous speakers, how to deliver a design education in the context of pandemic, right? When you are in lockdown. So not only moving the teaching to the online platforms, but also the subjects in which students were doing research, they needed to change in relationship to this new weak signal that was enabling a new normal, the pandemic new normal. Next slide, please. So after this pandemic, it was important to incorporate new ways of dealing with our research agenda, and especially in my personal interest, as I was telling you, I had to include how we moved to COVID-19 as something that is an emergency and because of a permanent pandemic, as we have seen in Spain, especially 2 weeks ago, we thought that things were going back to normal, and suddenly we have a second wave. So until we don't have a vaccine, it will become a permanent pandemic, kind of behaviors, and also dealing with organization of spaces and supply chains and distribution of goods, as was mentioned before. Also, the extreme oscillation of reality. It seems like we live in this kind of a schizophrenic, like as I was telling again, 2 weeks ago, everybody out, go to the beach. 2 weeks after, go back to your house. 2 weeks after, it's okay. And then it seems like this has a really high emotional cost into people. And then I'm also interested in the last one, which is economic reconstruction for a new normal. And I'm really happy to share with you that just yesterday or the day before yesterday, the European Union approved a 700 billion program for recovering of the economy, 700 billion euro, which is a lot. But I was very happy to see, at least on paper, it says that this investment would serve for the development of a new productive model based on ecological transition, new mobility frameworks, digitalization, that actually are part of the things that we have been working in the past, and I will tell you about it in a bit. So next slide, please. So let me tell you a quick story. About 250 years ago, having a horse was the top-notch thing to do in a Western city. If you had a horse, the horse was a symbol of freedom, right? Next slide, please. But then when you start to accumulate horses in the same urban space, then you start to have some health problems, right? The horse was the main technology to move things and people from one way to another. But actually, the horse manure became an urban problem. So a technology was having some consequences, and these consequences were affecting the health of people. So that's why the first conference on urban planning, one of the first ones, was about horse manure. Imagine, right? So what's the main topic to solve? Right? It was the kind of the pandemic at the moment. Next slide, please. With the years go on, we had the introduction of the famous 4T model, and also the introduction of the assembly line. And we started to develop cities differently. Next slide, please. So we started to fill cities with cars. That created another consequence, right? So this is like a similar to have like an artery blockage in your heart. So cities start to have this problem of traffic. And, you know, I know Manila has a big issue as well as Jakarta in relation to traffic. And one of the things that we have seen now, next slide, please, is that something like a pandemic, it seems like it's a heart surgery to recover certain things of the urban life that we somehow lost. And, you know, if you
Excuse me, Tomas.
Yes?
2-minute warning, please. Yeah, this is very engaging, but 2 minutes more. Yeah.
2 minutes
2
more?
minutes more. Yes, sorry.
Only 2. Oh, my God.
Okay, you can make it 3. Okay, go.
Okay, so next slide, please. This will be another technology that changed our life has been the mobile phone, the smartphone. Next slide, please. But this has another consequence, which is the influencers, and especially people like Kim Kardashian, which is alienating culture in many ways. So next slide, please. I have to be very fast. So the weak signals changed, as I was telling you. So different technologies enable different consequences and enable different change, but they happen differently at many layers, right? So this is taken from the Stuart Brand's research. And as you can see, like, you know, nature is one of the things that changes more slowly, but then something like fashion changed very rapidly, right? So how we operate with these changes and with these timings. Next slide, please. So when you have access to tools similar to what happened with computation revolution, with the digital revolution, that we started to use supercomputers in our pockets. What others are doing are enabling the access to fabrication tools, basically almost in our pockets, right? Especially in a space. Having access to these tools allows you to intervene in the reality and transform that reality. So this is how it looks at Fab Lab. This is in Iceland. And it's basically a series of machines together that you can program, that you can do digital design, and then you can produce almost anything. Next slide, please. And this is not only, next slide, please. One of the Fab Labs is Fab Lab Barcelona, where we have developed this research agenda in the last 10 years. And I want to have to skip this because I want to get into the point. Next slide, please. But this is a global network. Of course, Fab Lab Barcelona is part of that. So we're talking like today we have over 2,000 Fab Labs in the world that have the access to these machines, but also to educational programs to deliver the promise of democratizing digital fabrication tools. Next slide, please. Of course, Fab Labs, as you have seen probably in many places, have been engaged with, they are small and medium enterprises that have to respond to the pandemic, not to survive, actually to save lives. And this was about the production of protective equipment. Next slide, please. Which I think has been enough extended everywhere. In the New York Times, in the BBC, probably in all the news channels, I receive everyday notifications that more Fab Labs have been engaged in the last 4 months in basically providing almost at no cost access to PPE equipment. Next slide, please. But also people respond in many ways to this. And I think that that's important also, that it's not only technology that you need, but also people creativity that somehow, take things to the limit. So next slide, please. So we did a survey at the Foundation, and we identify what is the kind of things that Fab Labs can produce and can provide to people. Next slide, please. These are some of the examples. And also some of the numbers I shared with you. We, face shields, for example, almost 200,000 face shields were produced in Fab Labs, and with an average production rate of 13,000. Next slide, please. What this shows is the power of distributed networks to respond rapidly to a need that is happening not only in the world, but also at a very local level. Next slide, please. And changing this paradigm paradigm requires to understand the way that regions and cities produce are not only based in the kind of extreme globalization in which you have to import everything, but instead we're thinking on how to enable local infrastructure for on-demand production in cities by people, by empowered communities. Next slide, please. I'm going to finish very soon. So this, you know, the whole vision of what Fab Labs have to do is not only provide technology for the sake of technology, but actually promote a new model of production that allow us to increase the resiliencies of local creatives or local industries, small and medium enterprises, as well as enabling a more sustainable way of living, again, in cities and their bioregions, the bioregions that somehow the cities of the resources they need. Slides, please. I'm gonna, next slide, please. Let's skip that. So at the end, and this is really like almost the end, what we are working on is to enable a full stack in which we can find opportunities of design interventions in a distributed network like the Fab Labs, but also expand it to working with governments and working with multilateral organizations. So this stack basically builds from the bottom level layer, which is these 2,000 Fab Labs in the world, that you can use as an infrastructure of learning, as an infrastructure for innovation, but then you need to connect the different layers of the stack with the existing infrastructure of production, for instance, in the local industries, and at the end of it, to the policy level interventions that we can design together with governments. So next couple of slides. I think that this is a great opportunity to not only think about how we go back to normal. I think that we don't want to go back to normal. I think nobody wants. Normal was broken already. We have seen that people is finding new ways of expression, identifying their purpose. We're seeing like how the effects of the lockdown has produced positive effects in the environment. It could really damage economics, but if we measure economics just in the gross domestic product, it will be a really big mistake. And then at the end, I think that since I had so much short time and I've been cut now, you can go to the last slide, because next week you can join us. Next slide, sorry. The next one. Oh, this one. You can join us next week in the Global Fab Lab Conference. So we can have more time and have a conversation about how we are enabling emerging futures using distributed networks of fabrication and using global collaboration. Thank you very much, and thank you for the patience. Thank you, Maria Elena, for keeping the timing.
As you know, we are an advocate for Fab Labs here in the Philippines for over the last, I think, 4 months since March. Our Fab Labs, we have 30 Fab Labs in the Philippines. We're able to make like about 70,000 face shields, and we gave these to frontliners. So Fab Labs here in the Philippines have retained their relevance, and we're really thinking about how we move on from here. Okay,
I'm going to make a short comment on it just quickly, because on the defense of Fab Labs, most of these productions that have been happening globally have been based on altruism. And this, yes, again, the creative sector that has responding to society without any economic incentive. And I'm really happy to hear that you're supporting this. And I'm happy to continue this work that we started with Ria Matute and also with Bosch on making Fab Labs in the Philippines stronger and better.
Yeah. So all the 70,000 face shields our Fab Labs made, they all gave them out for free, and the materials were also donations from the community. So moving on to our next speaker, she will talk about coping with the COVID-19 pandemic experience from a Cebu social entrepreneur perspective. Ms. Kay Batikin, who is the manager of Holistic Coalition of the Willing, or Holy Cow. Kay grew up familiar with the furniture industry and creative entrepreneurial atmosphere of Cebu, and her background in communications and literature provided a dynamic third perspective towards value adding and storytelling in what used to be an industry known only for manufacturing. Holy Cow wants to foster and encourage sustainable creative entrepreneurship through authenticity, community, and the Filipino identity. So Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Ms. Kay Batikin. Kay?
Greetings to everyone logged on. I hope you're all safe where you are. My deepest thanks to you, Endesa and DTI, for the honor of presenting today. I represent the Holistic Coalition of the Willing, or Holy Cow for short. We are a coalition of mostly Cebuano and Visayas-based designers and manufacturers committed to involving multi-industry local players in our designs, which we push through 3 points of action: retail, product making, and design intervention. A quick history. We were born from the recession of 2009 after furniture export, which gave Cebu its clout and birthed, as Butch mentioned earlier, the export industry in the region, not just for furniture, but for other sectors as well, collapsed. People abroad were not buying furniture after they were being mortgaged out of their houses, and we were losing the numbers game with China. Closing was an option, but so was evolving. We figured that survival as an industry, despite downsizing for the meantime, meant looking locally, not just with preference to material and production, but market cultivation as well. We wanted to put sustainability and identity as key in this. Export manufacturing is designed for volume and speed and low cost, and is not always waste efficient nor eco-friendly. We wanted to tackle sustainability from a design standpoint. That is, to create things that allowed people to practice and be part of a culture of mindfulness and Filipino appreciation. We partner with crafting communities and barangays under the Department of Trade and Industries program. We began with Cebu Island, expanding to Region 7, and with the help of the DTI Regional Office, included areas in Region 8 and 6. You will see it in the slide. Please take note of the geography of our area. The way we get around is through boat. Our inter-industry players are diverse across the board. The Department of Technology and the academia assist with research and development. DTI and various industry chambers with private professionals help with exhibitions and interior design projects. We have developed an ecosystem with grassroots barangays and growers that begins with raw material manipulation and research, branching out to skills, craft cultivation, and ending with a final product often debuted in one or all of our platforms for exposure. That way, it fulfills a jury-rigged sort of one town, one specialty that the community can muster and be known for. For instance, the bamboo basket weavers of Antiquera Bohol, which you see in the slide there, from from conception to design intervention and the final product on the far right. Our preference for natural material and redesigning waste material through upcycling has let us curate some limited number but genuinely unique designs. Rooted in Filipino culture, we take pride in high-value products from woven rice sacks or discarded shellfish from restaurants, which we use for inlay, or even excess from bigger furniture. Waste, we believe, is a resource. Design could give it value. This lets us have a dynamic inventory that allows us to reinvent or retell our campaigns through the shows or spaces that we exhibit in. A complete antithesis to export production, we are able to arrange an archipelago of pieces representative of our diverse communities. That way, this gives exposure to the people whose stories are in our products. Next, our physical store is located near Cebu's business district and allows a full immersive experience. As Butch mentioned earlier, sensory input is important in the Filipino brand of creativity. When we work with projects for bigger developments, we also always give preference for community-made components. We worked hard on these 4 assets that you see in the slide and had our timeline stacked up until all the way to the first quarter of 2021 when the virus brought the world to its knees. Our restrictions in the city were immediate and intense, and for good reason. Physically, we were hamstrung, unable to sail to the neighboring island. If you recall how we were all we are located in the Visayas, or we couldn't drive down to our community in the province, or even get out of our residential grid. We worried for our rental overhead for our shop, and we had to send out notices to pending project partners about setbacks. Psychologically and emotionally, the virus and the quarantine drew barriers. People slid into what we call pangluod or sulking. Amelioration was politicized. Priorities, making money, were set against priorities, safety. For a nation of creators, not being able to create or make a living out of making severely damaged morale. And this is where we are now. The road forks before us. Is the virus an interlude whereupon we wait until a vaccine happens and we do damage control? Or do we crawl forward nonetheless and accept that we must learn to live with the virus and learn from it? Just as it is mutating, so must we. We lament the assets we invested so much on, the four platforms I mentioned earlier, but did we actually ever lose our most important ones? And are we losing them as we are blinded by falling sales or foreboding figures? How can we communicate to them the urgency of safety protocols, especially in the context of Cebuanos being chastised as dahig ulo or stubborn? If the creative sector is not traditionally essential, then what essential things should we be doing? To the employees of the 62% closed or suspended companies, what they do to them is essential. First, the creative sector has to claim responsibility for all the people that is making a living out of it. Jack Ma says that simply surviving is already winning. And for an industry dependent on the mind, skills, and craftsmanship of its people, their survival ensures that we will still have people to come to our stores, to enjoy our products, to work on projects with, and to teach us about material. On our end, we are planning on ways to make our space safe for visitors, our staff, and ourselves, while keeping up that sensory experience. Previous slide, please. Okay, next slide. We're planning to make hand washing facilities ubiquitous, as this is the virus killer. We looked at package handling, and curiously, while researching the work of Creator, this is an SF-based engineering group, and you'll see their window there in the slide, we cycled back to the design of the sari-sari store, which already encourages social distancing. We're thinking to appeal to billboard owners in the city to replace or redesign retail ads to include safety protocols. Currently, we are discussing backyard gardening and other alternative food and security avenues with some of our communities. A Holy Cow partner designer is executing this plan with her tribe partners so that, secure in food stock, they can continue to steadily continue creating. Next.
Excuse me, Kay. You have 2 minutes left?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We owe it to the creative capital that we've already built up, the new horde of young designers emerging from various sectors, perhaps inspired by the City of Design. We owe it to those who didn't give up on the design industry despite the recession. Reviving the local economy is the only way we can push ourselves up again. Our people need to know that an entire life's worth of creativity and skill has meaning. We have to treat this as the design problem. And like redesigning the export and manufacturing model, we have to redesign our notions of industry. The virus has pared down for us what is essential. Next. And as businesses, as designers, we have to answer this. We are on survival mode right now. But contrary to what films depict of guns and jungle laws prevailing, we get up from where we fall on the power of the other. I'll leave with how Dr. Margaret Mead, anthropologist, answered a question about where were the first signs of civilization, of humans successfully pulling off complex developments. It wasn't weapons or farming tools or artifacts, she replied, but evidence of a healed femur. You see, the femur is the largest bone in the body and where all the muscles and the hip and knees supporting the weight are connected when it exerts force. This takes about half a year to heal when broken, and a broken femur meant that you were prey to roving predators and immobility, death, no access to food, no access to water. Yet evidence of a healed femur meant the survivor had a support system that brought them to safety, that fed and sheltered them, until they could get up and to do the same for another. This is how we rise. Good morning, good evening, good night, and stay safe where you are. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Kay, for that engaging presentation. It was good to see things from the perspective of a young social entrepreneur. Keep it up, keep going, Kay. And now we have Kay was our last speaker for this event. We are now in the question and answer portion. I think we have time for one or two questions. If you recall, during registration, when you registered for the event, you were asked there was a portion there where you were asked some questions. So we picked one up from Mr. Fabrice Raharihauna, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Industry, Trade and Craft, Madagascar. And I think this is addressed to the speakers, whoever can answer this question. How do we manage to make this pandemic as an opportunity for our MSMEs to innovate? Which factors should be taken into consideration first or the most? Anybody of our speakers care to answer this question?
I guess I can start and get the ball rolling. Can you hear me, Nanette?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Like with most, like in this pandemic, like with most other external shocks of that matter, there really are no blanket strategies for MSMEs to innovate. I really think that's important that everyone perform a SWOT first. Really figure out what your core competencies are, where your weaknesses lie, to identify the opportunities and threats. Once you're there, you leverage your competencies to capitalize on the opportunities in your particular field and market.
Okay, so anybody else wants to react to that question? No? Yes? Okay. So for Design Singapore, is Mr. Jack Yeo still here? Jack Yeo? There's
Yes.
a question here for Design Singapore, sir. Yeah,
Right.
this is from Hope Esperanza Milgar, DTI from the Philippines. For Design Singapore, what are some of the best practices of your MSMEs in the creative industry that enable them to bounce back amid the pandemic?
Actually, it's hard to say now. For the design sector, I think they are equally impacted as many other industries. What we see as heartening is that they are taking an initiative to look at how else can they do their business better, looking for diversification. With the restriction in kind of physical contact and business development being curtailed, that going online is one of those areas that they are all looking at. Not just providing consultancy, but also providing training as well. So there's quite a number of things that they're looking at, and it's really about helping them to build the skill set that could bring them into those new areas.
Okay, so I got trainings, skill sets, and going online. Jack, so can you
and also the
specify
mindset.
what kind of trainings, what kind of skills upgrading trainings you did or you are planning to do?
So in different areas, one is definitely about picking up digital skill sets, learning how to use digital tools, digital platforms, using digital means to expand their outreach. That's one. And then second is really about how do you go about picking up skill sets like research is one of those areas I mentioned earlier on, deeper research into those topical areas that everyone in the world is kind of looking at due to this pandemic. And then the third area is probably really about deepening their understanding on how to develop creative solutions and understanding the users as part of the design process.
Okay, so thank you, Jack. So I think it's also related to innovation. So how there's a question here about how can the creative industry cope with the pandemic and what are the resources they need the most to restart and recover. So we heard about trainings, upskilling, going online. Is innovation also part of this? Having an innovative mindset, creativity and innovation, that stuff.
Yes, I think that is very important. That's why
Yes.
we're trying to encourage. But I'm sure the other speakers will have their views as well. Yeah.
Yes. Butch and Tomas, can you
Maybe
answer
Tomas
this?
can answer that one first.
Yeah. I believe that I don't think it's about thinking about innovation as something that you can do. I think that if you don't innovate in the ways you do certain things, in the way you provide training, in the way you provide economic support, in the way that you attach with a new supply chain reality, in a way in which the creative industry can respond to the real challenges of our society. If you don't put innovation across everything and you treat it separately, it will be a total failure, in my opinion. So I believe this is the moment to do things differently, as I was saying before. And it's not about trying to recover things that we left behind. I'm not saying let's forget, the last 14,000 years of humanity after the invention of agriculture, but it's mostly let's take what is really valuable from what we have, the technology development that we have, the access to certain services we have is incredible, that what industrialization gave us. But this is a great opportunity to take a step, a huge step forward. And I think especially the countries in this region have that dynamic, the dynamic way in which things happen here. I can tell you, from the Latin American perspective, from the European perspective, from what I'm still learning from this region. I think the opportunities to innovate, as something that happens across all sectors is huge, and I hope that this is a chance that we don't. I include myself also. We don't dismiss.
Okay. Thank you for that, Tomas. There's a question here, but really this is it goes beyond the creative sector. Is there a role for national or regional supply chains in facilitating access to essential goods in future health crises? So this is really about supply chains. Butch?
I can pick up on that.
Yes.
One thing that this pandemic really early on showed us was that the global paradigm as it is, with everything being made in China at the outset of the pandemic, was really magnified. You saw supply chain disruptions everywhere, from computers to cell phones to food and all that. So I think there's a big movement to return back to regional and local supply chains, because you do want to insulate yourselves from future shocks. Which brings me actually to a related thing, that every aspect of the creative supply chain, from supply, production, distribution, and access, that all needs to be reassessed and retooled to adjust to the new realities. And this is, I think, a perfect opportunity for us to engage in such soul-searching and analysis, to really redefine how we as people and how we move forward, and how we can, as communities, can thrive in the new paradigms.
Yes, I like the word soul-searching and the new paradigms. And I think Fab Labs have been thinking this way since, I got into Fab Labs in 2014, back in 2014, and this was already the thinking of Fab Labs. So I was able to go to Fab 10, and that's already celebrating 10 years of Fab Labs. So it all started with this kind of paradigm. So these were really forward-thinking people. So
even the idea of distributed production that Tomas mentioned is also very relevant going forward.
Yes, yeah. So what Fab Labs or Neil Gershenfeld was thinking, but so many years ago, like 15 years ago, it's really already happening now. COVID just brought that realization to the fore. So I think we need to move on to our last question. Should we have our last question? What does the future look like for the creative industry sector in the Philippines? What skills would be in high demand after the pandemic? This is from Paula Therese Raniola, an academic institution in the Philippines. This is Philippines, so I don't know. Butch
maybe
and Tomas, you've
Kay.
been here so many times, so maybe you can
Maybe we
also
can hear.
answer.
Maybe we can hear from Kay.
Okay, right. Okay. It's okay.
Yeah, hey.
Yeah.
So wait, she's asking about what the future looks like.
Yes.
We don't know. We're making it up as we go along, right?
Yeah.
But what we want to bring into the picture is what we want to emphasize is what we were doing had a lot of flaws and had a lot of mistakes, and the virus just showed these fractures to us. And moving forward, we need to fix this. In particular, for example, design as being pagwapa or aesthetic, when in fact it should be integrated to all industries and all sectors across the board. It should be in communication. It should be in the systems that distribute amelioration to people. It should be in health and safety protocols. And it should be human-centric as well, because without people who will design, who will go to our shops, who will be the creative entrepreneurs that we say we have, no? So there isn't really it will be good after, after a vaccine is found. But as designers, our primary focus is to problem solve, okay? This is a problem that needs solving, essentially. So for SMEs, I would suggest damage control. Assess your damage control. If you have overhead, see how you can fix that. If you've got inventory, try to get it moving. But always look out for your staff. Look out for your designers, because it is their skill, it's their craft, it's their experience that really brings the humanity in your brand. So look out for them and look out for your stock and your assets as well.
Okay. Thank you.
If I may just add,
yes.
Nat,
Right. Yes.
yeah, I just very quickly, I've been looking at what's been doing well with during this pandemic as part of our business continuity plans, as well as my personal pivot. And since we like doing acronyms, I've categorized it under NICE. So things that are N under nourish, I insulate, C connect, E entertain. These are all doing very well, as a lot of us are still in lockdown. So under nourishment, you have food, wellness, fitness, gardening, cooking, whatever nourishes your body and soul. Insulate is PPE, sanitizers, medicines. Connect is chat groups, social media, other online platforms, and entertain. So streaming sites, online games, can be board games, as well as social media. So if you're able to find yourself somewhere in this space, then there's a lot of opportunity for you to actually even flourish during this pandemic. So it's just really a matter of pivoting.
Yeah, interestingly enough, all of the NICE industries that you mentioned involve or are rooted in design. So
Yes.
It's not so much as creative industries being non-essential, we're actually very, very essential.
Okay.
So, notions of industry have to be reimagined or have to be demystified.
And we need to dispel, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So we're all on the same mindset here. Yeah.
Can I add
Who
something
is this?
quickly? Just two things, Thomas.
Okay. Yes. Okay, Tomas. Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to
go.
say something like I agree with Kay about like the damage control, but I think that I think designers should make an effort on moving from problem solving from kind of from identifying what the real problem is. I think that we are sometimes focused on the wrong problems, and if the problem is increased GDP, I think that is the wrong problem. Probably should be another problem. And then the other thing I wanted to mention in relation with what Watch was saying in nourishing, and this emerging in various conversations, is the idea of moving like we have praised like the sharing economy, and I think like this is a very beautiful moment to praise for the caring economy, or the economy of care. I think that's important to think about in the future, caring of people and caring of the environment.
Yeah. So anybody else wants to put in their last words? No. Okay. So let's end this Q&A session. Thank you for the discussion. It was nice. It was good. I wish we could have continued it And we learned a lot. And, it's really good to be exposed to other kinds of thinking so that, we open our minds and be more creative. So we don't, we were able to celebrate our humanity and really come up with more innovative solutions for the future. So we move on to our next speaker. Uh, to close our webinar, our next speaker has been called DTI's own renewable energy behind the successes of the Department of Trade and Industry in the Central Visayas. Coming from the ranks, she became regional director, bringing with her experience she had gained from a professional life steeped in the intensely challenging field of government service, a career spanning 3 decades. In 2013, she bagged the Employee of the Year Executive Level Award under the System on Performance Rewards and Incentives of the DTI. Her leadership has enabled DTI Region 7 to be among the department's outstanding regional agencies from 2014 to 2018 and among the best performing agencies in the country today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from the Department of Trade and Industry, Region 7, Asteria C. Caberte.
Thank you, Nat. Hello, everyone. I wish you all the best of health. I would like to thank the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs for their full support to this event, with the Philippines Department of Trade and Industry Regional Operations Group as part of our national celebration for MSME Week. And of course, to all our speakers who were so good, I would have wanted if I could only give some minutes, share some minutes of my time slot to you all because we were so engaging. Okay, the first quarter of 2020 was not a good start for the year. We started off with a high GDP of 6.7 in 2019, at least for the last quarter, and we are now at negative 0.2%. Considering that the creative industries is 7.3% of the total global economy, we can extrapolate the value of decline from the sector globally. For the past few months, meetings and huddles have been ongoing to save the cluster in this pandemic. There are intense campaigns for digital transformation, huddles and mind mapping of creative industries, and enablers from government are happening. As we speak, there is a proposed bill to delineate scope and limitations of the creative industry, defining specific roles per government agency. A separate budget will then be allocated to support the bill. I share with Cebu Creative have a lot of initiatives in this pandemic, as enumerated by Mr. Butch Karungay. And government just have to come up with enabling moves which are easy to access. Butch, we take note of the reboot toolkit and also on the online portal to leverage on Cebu City as a UNESCO designated city of design. I share with Butch in his views that creative solutions will be required to solve real-life problems, and creative thinking is needed to seize opportunities. Mr. Jaxio of Singapore Design Council shared that they are using this downtime to prepare for growth and rebound. They have different packages for hardest hit sectors, like relief from contractual obligations and job support schemes to retain talents. We in the Philippines really hope to see the day that we can also have your moving forward strategies from Singapore. As we rise beyond the present challenge, we need the creative culture not just to survive, like Kay Batikan's company, born out of recession, they have survived and definitely they have thrived. She further stressed that people is most important asset. What can we still do to be essential? The future for the creative industry is filled with challenges, but history has taught us repeatedly that is, despite all these continuous external shocks, humanity always finds triumph and makes the greatest leaps during the darkest times. Tomas Diaz also talked about the weak signals, reality, and opportunities in the new normal. Designing emergent futures. He talked about the economy of care, very inspiring. The economic reconstruction for a new normal. But I think Mr. Jess is so happy being stranded in Bali now after his last event in Cebu City during the Making Future. That was actually our last event here in Cebu, a week before the lockdown. The creative industry group plays a critical role in crafting the future. As, as creative problem solvers, we must assert together the importance of your unique skill sets, work closer with each other to magnify your reach and impact and forge together the way forward to a much brighter paradigm that is respectful of nature, respectful of each other, and respectful of ourselves. We end, we end with a wish that we will continue to connect with each other. We thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope that you and DESA will continue to partner with us in this endeavor of moving forward, especially, and my special thanks to also goes to Mr. Butch Karungay for putting up with this event, Mr. Kelly Yu and Annie Lu of UNDESA for helping us mounting this event. And also to Mr. Sabenda, I'd like to wish that we continue to move forward to optimize the enabling policy framework for MSMEs, especially for the creative industry sector. We should sustain, as what you've said, Mr. Sabanda, critical policy support for the creative sector in this pandemic. So good luck, everyone, and always stay safe. We hope to have more engagements with you in this platform. Thank you very much, and stay safe always.
Thank you
So
very much.
thank you very much.
Thank you,
Prophet After.
guys.
Thank you. Thank you, UNDESA, DTI, for organizing this capability building webinar. Thank you, everyone, for giving us your time. We hope this webinar has given you insights on the impact of COVID-19 on the creative sector in the Philippines. We remain grounded on the current reality, but we are hopeful. But we end this webinar on a hopeful note. So kindly also, we'd like to ask the participants to kindly fill in the feedback survey when you close the webinar. You can find the feedback survey, I can see it, in the chat box. There's a link in the chat box, a tiny URL link in the chat box that you can check out for your feedback survey. Thank you. Stay safe and healthy, everyone.